Maybe we can just kickstart with that. Always good to start with participation.
Yeah, this is a question for Ian. On one of the last slides, you actually had Bitcoin mining as, I think, 2.2 billion trees. Would you say that one thing that an organization could do is to not add crypto as a part of your business model or blockchain technologies as an environmental initiative?
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for the question. And for me, I'm a bit ambivalent about this, right, about crypto. So on one hand, yes, there is a large environmental footprint, and that's recognized, and that's something that we need to fix. But on the other hand, there are emerging methods, right? For example, the shift to proof of stake that might be better than traditional mining. So for those people who are in the Web3 industry, you would know that there is now the Shanghai, right? The post-Shanghai update that will basically complete this entire transition of mining to proof of stake, which is basically a non-mining way to get more coins for the Ethereum coin, right? I don't hold any Bitcoin here, so don't worry, no conflict of interest. The idea really is that there are ways to use technology in ways that were green. We have to always understand that traditional digitization as it was in the last 20 years for Web 2, right? We're talking about emails, we're talking about our own Microsoft Word-like software. It wasn't green at all, right? So we shouldn't, and I'd say it wouldn't be wise to pin the blame on crypto. They have a large environmental footprint, and it is very problematic. They are finding ways to deal with it, and we should help them on their journey to make it even better, right? At the same time, we should also look at what we are doing in the Web 2 world, so as to speak, to ensure that we ourselves, while we're pinning the blame on them, also better the way we create websites, the way we create mobile applications, the way we create IoT software, right? So that when both of us work hand in hand to make the world greener, we can then avert the 300% increase in greenhouse gas by 2040. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may add a few things on the Bitcoin and blockchain, which is actually interesting. Maybe two things, because I think it's interesting to take a step back and just realize what we are talking about. First, blockchain and crypto are completely different. I guess you know that, but sometimes in the general public, people tend to say blockchain equals crypto. I think it's very dangerous. Because actually it's a bit like throwing out the bathtub's water. I can't remember the expression, but it's basically saying that you throw everything together, but maybe we should keep the blockchain approach first. When you think about it, being able to trust the process and not trust the people you're meeting, when you think about it, it's more a social innovation than a proper technical innovation. And even in terms of building communities, this approach is absolutely brilliant. And blockchain is, by essence, a wonderful framework. Now, we can use it for cool things, environmental-based case studies, not only, definitely, and Bitcoin is part of it, but again, taking a step back. And finally, another thing also is to say that indeed, I don't know if we can agree on the numbers, right? But the crypto mining, roughly in 2021, was the equivalent of the carbon emissions of Argentina. So I would say a medium-sized country. Now, the question is not so much about the absolute value, but the relative value. How many users for that? I mean, definitely not as many people as in Argentina. And again, the carbon footprint is cool, but carbon footprint per capita is more fair, more just, and brings the real topic, I think.
Thank you. Really good start to the panel, I'll say. Love it when I work myself out of my job. But maybe I'd like to hear a little bit, or at least raise a hands from the audience. I think, how many of you here are API developers or technical folk? Okay, we've got like maybe 10 of you. How many of you are in decision-making power for your organization's IT, network, or hardware, or software? 1, 2, all right, 3. Okay. Anybody on a C-suite level making C-suite decisions? We've got 1. Okay, cool. Did I miss anyone out? Want to shout? Maybe a hacker or so. All right, great. So quick introduction. My name is Keziah Quek. I am the Southeast Asia Sustainability Lead for Capgemini. My job is essentially to help our Southeast Asian clients understand how to decarbonize And that ranges from, working with data all the way to, IT footprints and even, server cloud usage and so forth. So very happy to be here with two experts. And I think the greatest way that I found is to make it concrete for people. So I'm really excited to do that today. Before we jump into the first question that I have, maybe I can ask the both of you, Thibaut and Ian, to maybe just say one thing. If anyone were to take any one thing out of your presentation or this conversation today, what would you like them to take away?
Okay, so I think first things first, I think we need to go back to first principles, right? We need to basically recognize that everything has a carbon footprint. So for too long, we've been believing this myth that by going digital, you're going fully green, right? So that's a partial truth, because by going digital, you may be going green in some aspects, but you are also potentially causing a bigger problem in many other aspects, right? So for me, one thing that I hope everyone can take away is to basically dispel this old myth, right? That by going green, you're automatically, or rather by going digital, you're automatically going green.
A second myth I would like to reflect on is the responsibility, I would say. Some people here, I guess, in cybersecurity, in traceability, in transparency, and people who believe in original blockchain networks, etc., know that one of the problems we have is pretty much being able to hold people responsible for the things they are doing. And I think digitization didn't help in a way on that aspect. Everything's somewhere in the cloud, or somewhere in the cloud just means it's just somewhere, but not, again, I mean, I repeat myself, sorry, but it's been not in our backyard. And I think that maybe the redemption of tech, if there is a redemption of tech, might come from this capability to address the topic of transparency and responsibility. And I really hope that you, maybe for those who didn't know this topic before, maybe it came to a realization, but really to let that sink in, because it's a critical question that is going way beyond just digitization. We live in a world where I think responsibility disappeared somewhere, and it's easy to insult somebody online, for instance, and just disappear. That's part also of what digitization allowed. Carbon footprint is just, again, part of the problem.
Thank you. And I think most people were here, were they here for your talk already, or should we? Okay, so you know who Thibaut is and you know who Ian is. We'll skip the preamble. Great. So I see that they've probably already made the case for you in terms of the fact that there is an environmental case for IT footprint minimization. But maybe let's have a question around, what does good look like? What does succeeding look like? I think we've talked about enterprise level, footprint reduction. We've talked about personal level footprint reduction. And, I hear this question at dinner parties, sometimes from clients, does it really matter if I'm an individual and I reduce my carbon footprint, versus, okay, great, I'm one organization, I have this footprint, and then I need to reduce it, but then how much? When do I know it's good? Are there published benchmarks, that we can follow? Maybe for both of you, whoever wants to go first.
I won't talk about the usage part because I will leave it to Jan, I guess. However, on the end of, I would say, again, the cradle to grave approach, I'll talk about the manufacturing and the end of life. Our problem that we have for these two things is actually related, but they are actually a bit deep. First problem to calculate the impact of manufacturing is that today the data that we have are data the brands are okay to share with us. So if they want to tell us today, I don't know, the carbon footprint of this laptop is 200 kilograms, I guess we have to take it for granted, which is actually asking a problem of transparency. I don't see anybody here in the room in the next 5 years to be able to go to Apple, knock at the door and say, can you guys show me your supply chain and we'll audit actually your data. Because basically we are talking about intellectual property here. So that links to very complex topics. Now, when it comes to end of life and waste, we have the same topic of transparency today. And talking about blockchain, I think potentially a good case study for blockchain would be to ensure the traceability of electronic waste at the end of life for devices, because we desperately need this today in Singapore. You put your e-waste somewhere. You may have a certificate, but I can tell you that most of the actors in the industry, they give you the certificate because they ask you, but you don't have any confirmation or validation of what's being happening there. And the second problem is end of waste, end of life, and I'll give the topic, the mic back to Ian on the usage. But it's the fact that electronic waste is linked to pollution, and you have no KPIs in companies for pollution. Again, carbon footprint is the cardinal point and the absolute value that companies are tracking. Talk about biodiversity, social justice, behaviors, mineral resources. They don't. I mean, you lost them most of the time, which is sad, and that's why we need awareness in a way.
Yep. To me, I think that the distributed nature, right, the distributed nature of the internet and of our use of digital products and services is a microcosm of everything that is wrong with how we as mankind have approached the climate problem. All right. So the idea here really is that if we look at climate change on a very macro level, right? We look at it from a very big picture perspective. It's very much like you should do something, you should do something. But then when we point one finger at others, right, the remaining three point back at ourselves. And we aren't really prepared to do anything, right? And that's really the problem when we look at it from an IT perspective as well. It's more defined in an IT perspective because when we look at the problem of, say, web pages, right? Websites. Everyone has a website. All companies have one. If you have your own blog shop, you might have one as well. And everyone is saying that, you know what? My footprint is not too much in a year. You know, it's maybe 10 kilograms, 20, 30 kilograms of CO2 per annum, right? That's not too bad. I mean, if I take the bus more often, it should offset. But that's exactly the mentality that is setting us so far back. Because all of us feel that our efforts are negligible, it doesn't shift the needle in the grand scheme of things. We don't do anything as a collective because we don't do anything as an individual. And that's very, very dangerous. So one of the things that we feel, at least this panel, and I believe I speak for Thibaut and Keziah as well, is that action actually begins from ourselves, right? It sounds extremely cliche, but if we look at the IT industry, this is precisely what is needed. So when we talk about, say, green coding practices, right? It basically means that every single developer needs to adhere to those standards. Because if 3 out of the 4 does, but the last one doesn't, he's going to mess the whole thing up. And that's also the same when we look at other things, right? Design, etc. So coming back to Keziah's question, the distributed nature of carbon emissions is what makes it hard, but it's also what empowers each and every one of us, because all of us has skin in the game, right? Because we have skin in the game, we can also play that role to minimize our impact in the IT sense and in the broader sense.
That makes sense. I think my personal question is, do we centralize the decentralized nature of carbon, the responsibility? I'm not sure we can answer that today, but good. So I think we've also now built a case for attitude, right? And paradigm, right? We understand like why we should do it. We understand why we're responsible. But then, you know, I guess then what everybody comes back with is, well, it's hard. You know, how do I do it when there are cost issues? There is, you know, issues on misalignment with various departments, misalignment with, you know, oh, I have legacy stuff, legacy software that I'm already invested in and I can't get out of and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about trade-offs maybe. You know, what can people expect in terms of the trade-offs they need to make? How do we think about the trade-offs in a positive way so that we can still move forward and do our part?
Again, I'll talk about the hardware part. Extend the lifespan of your laptops for 2 years, you save money, you save carbon. Bingo. Honestly, it's not sexy, but it works. You also obviously have some issues to mention about cybersecurity, probably your IT department with the masters inside the operating systems, but I guess it's quite worth the shot. And sorry if I'm being rude here, but I'm talking to a lot of companies saying, oh, no, we can't do second-hand equipment because, you know, of data privacy. I mean, yes, okay, but actually you have a lot of solutions that exist on the market to deal with this problem. The people who crafted these solutions, they knew that. I mean, they're not completely dumb. So definitely hiding behind some excuses of I need to change one process is the favorite excuse of major companies. That's the first one. And again, end of life is different. End of life is trickier. You can help through donation, etc. I mean, honestly, you have a lot of solutions, but I would say it's first harder to assess in terms of impact, and second, that comes with a part of selflessness, and sometimes it's hard to sell selflessness. I would say.
Yeah, I think the financial case is very important. So I guess we're all here in the sustainability track, the chamber, because we either are into sustainability, we're considering something with regards to sustainability, or because one of the three of us invited you here and you feel bad if you aren't here, right? So the thing is that essentially when you sell the sustainability case, right, it always goes back to dollars and cents. So we like to joke in the sustainability side of things that people always look at the green, right? Greenback, right? The US dollar money. Because the only way you get through a sustainability project in any company is if you get through the budget people, you get through the CFO, he approves, right? You get the money, you implement a sustainability related project. And it's the same with the tech community, right? They must see an incentive to adopt practices that is out of the norms, right? Because you have to understand that most people in the tech world right now, they spend 4 years, 6 years even, if they did a master's, maybe longer, learning the way they code and that standard way, right? So they spend that much time acquiring knowledge to do things in a certain way. And if you go to them tomorrow and you try to change that, you're going to face a lot of resistance. And that's something that we feel, at least on our side, a need to really change things from the ground up. And that's why we're launching the Global Alliance for Sustainable Digitization for Youth, right? The idea really is that if the children, if the youth start learning coding, they start learning technology in a sustainable way from the ground up, then when they go into the workforce, you're going to have far less resistance compared to the status quo today, right? Whereby people have learned things in a certain way, they're not going to change just because of you, and therefore you don't really have much progress, right? So that really dives very deep into the culture in which we really create technology, not just new technology like blockchain, but also old regular technology, your HTML, your CSS, your Java. How do you code it, right? What is taught in school, and how can we make that more environmentally focused? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what Yann is saying. I think we can't consider the financial part without putting in front of it, like facing it, the convenience aspect of this. If you want to actually, small benefits, small inconvenience, okay, huge inconvenience means huge benefits in terms of cost savings or ROI. And in general, I mean, based on my experience, you can't go to companies saying you're going to save X amount of CO2 or money. They're always going to ask you at some point, yeah, but how hard is it going to be for me to be? And that's always a relative a ratio actually to calculate the inconvenience divided by the money or the benefits the company can get. Talking only about money is a bit like probably you miss part of the spectrum. And a lot of companies are like, yeah, I know I'm going to save money, but I don't want to change my processes because I have to convince my +1, my +2, my +3, etc. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess the maybe one other incentive is to get the CEO or the investor to say, well, if you don't do it, then, or else. We've got a question there.
Thanks a lot. Today we all gather together to discuss and expose towards more and more API uses. And for me, having more APIs are like increasing the digital carbon footprint, because we will expose more and more data to the graph here. So what solution you will provide, or maybe some guidelines in the API world to reduce the carbon footprint?
Question might be for you, Ian, I think.
Okay, so that's a really good question. And I think that can be linked quite intrinsically to how we deal with two things, right? Bots, like scrapers, and also spam, right? So a lot of API calls for, I would say, web pages, digital infrastructure that is public facing, right? Facing the general public is subject to a lot of web scraping, a lot of bots, right? That ping your APIs unnecessarily a lot of times a day, right? I can tell from fact because in the past, back about 3 years back, one of the things we did pro bono in our company was that we actually created a very cool tool, you know, like a tool that helped people travel during COVID. And we realized a very funny thing was that a lot of the pings that we had gotten were from random bots, you know, that wanted it for one reason or another. We couldn't quite pin down which they were, but we know they weren't human due to the speed in which they pinged us, etc. Right? So we did our analysis on that. So one of the things with APIs and what makes it so, well, carbon intensive is basically the action of non-human actors. Right? So that's something to consider here. Because by protecting your infrastructure, you're not just protecting it from, say, a DDoS attack, right? You're also basically saving the environment when you're not letting all those pesky bots, etc., come in and like do whatever they want to do. Right? So that's one. Number two is that actually, and that's the reason why we're here in API days, even though we aren't talking about APIs, is that APIs are actually, if you think of it in a very broad perspective, a very nice solution to the traditional carbon-intensive way we do things, right? So the idea now is that you've got one person, right? He does something really well, and if you want that benefit, you ping him, right? And he gives you an API call, you do an API call, and done, right? You don't have to replicate and basically duplicate many software doing the same thing. So that's how API in itself actually is very carbon friendly, right? You just need one guy to do something pretty well, and everyone just does an API call, right? It's fair enough. You basically get to cut down a lot of things that we traditionally did in-house, right? And that's something that is of benefit to people nowadays. So two sides of the game. One would be APIs generally are fairly carbon free. And the other aspect of things would be, let's talk about the non-human actors. If we can prevent that, we can reduce the amount of CO2 consumption pretty dramatically.
All right. So do we have time for one more question, or is that a?
Do we have one more
I
question?
think we do, actually. Is that all right?
Okay, just very quickly.
The question is, do we have a benchmarking? Like, let's say if I open my Google page in a white mode or a black mode, or I use some hardware, let's say I use a certain brand of laptop. Do I have a benchmarking? How do I compare the products, websites, even the source code which we are developing? Like how much, is it green efficient or not efficient? But, I do not see, I mean, logically, I do not see it on internet and all the places, just a white paper somewhere that the programming language comparison. But any startups coming to publish some KPIs or some, I mean, maybe doing some APIs also to give your carbon footprint on the fly, something like this.
Yeah. I have two things to reflect. I'm not qualified to reply to everything you said. However, you said KPIs. Indeed, if you want to be able to monitor the impact of your sustainability, I think that's how I wrapped up the session earlier, you need to put a KPI in front of it. That's for sure. I can actually, I mean, I have KPIs on my database to help companies drive their change. But sometimes, actually, honestly, these KPIs, you just take a step back and you realize, I don't know, for instance, you want to calculate the amount of applications you have that are adapted to the visually impaired people. I'll talk about UX later. You just calculate the number of web apps you have, you divide by the number of apps that you have for visually impaired people, and there you go, you have your KPI. Question is, you need to be able to put not so much the KPI, but the process to follow the KPI. Who's going to lead that? Who's going to report? Who's going to read that? Who's going to aggregate, etc., etc. But it's not related to sustainability. It's pretty much any kind of project management. Second, we didn't talk too much, sadly, about UX, but UX and UI also has an important part on this aspect of IT sustainability. We talk a lot about optimization of software, of code, etc. But please talk with your front-end managers. I was CPO in my former startup. It's extremely important to design like user base, to be user base, of course, but also to think of features. in the end, the backend developers and the APIs are a mean for a purpose, but question the purpose. You also have the quality, and you should feel entitled to be able to question the features.
Okay. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up our sustainability track. Thank you very much to our panel, Keziah, Thibaut, Ian, and also Aman, our speaker.